The arena was loud, but one small corner was silent. Among thousands of screaming fans, a child sat quietly near the stage, fragile, pale, holding back tears no one noticed. Terminal cancer had already taken so much from her: strength, time, certainty. This concert was never supposed to be about hope. Then Freddie Mercury saw her. In the middle of the show, surrounded by lights and noise, Freddie did something no one expected. Something not written in the set list. Something that stopped security, stunned the band, and changed one child's final memory forever. The moment she realized what Freddie was doing just for her, she broke down in tears. Before this story ends, you'll discover how Freddie noticed the child, what he did that shocked the entire audience, and why this moment became one of the most emotional, private acts of compassion in his life. This is not a story about fame. It's a story about humanity, and how one small gesture can mean everything when time is running out. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Freddie Mercury. The lights were blinding. Freddie Mercury stood at center stage, bathed in white and gold, his voice soaring effortlessly across the arena. Thousands of fans screamed his name, hands raised, hearts open. From above, the crowd looked like a single living organism, pulsing, screaming, alive. But Freddie had always seen details others missed. Faces, eyes, silences. As he moved across the stage, commanding the crowd with instinct and precision, something caught his attention near the front rows. Not noise, not movement, but stillness. A child. She was small, seated in a wheelchair just behind the barrier, her body wrapped in a blanket far too large for her frame. Her hair was gone, her face pale, almost translucent under the harsh arena lights. While everyone around her screamed and jumped, she sat quietly, clutching a handmade sign against her chest. Freddie slowed his steps without realizing it. The sign read simply, "This is my last concert." His chest tightened. Freddie had seen everything: devotion, obsession, madness. But this was different. This wasn't about fandom. This was about time. About someone who knew they didn't have much of it left. The song ended. The crowd roared. Freddie raised his fist triumphantly, but his eyes never left the child. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She was smiling. Softly, carefully, as if even joy had been rationed. Freddie turned away briefly, forcing himself to continue. The show had momentum. The band followed the setlist flawlessly. The lights shifted. The next song began. But Freddie's mind was no longer entirely on the music. He remembered hospital rooms. Not from his own life. Not yet, but from visits he had made quietly, anonymously, never allowing cameras or headlines to follow. He remembered the way children learn too early how to be brave. As he sang, Freddie drifted closer to the edge of the stage. Security stiffened. They were trained to watch for chaos, not compassion. Freddie crouched briefly during a musical break, pretending to interact with the front row. In reality, he was searching for her again. She was still there. Her eyes met his. For just a second, the world seemed to shrink to that exchange. The noise faded. The lights dulled. Freddie saw fear there, not of him, not of the crowd, but of loss, of endings. He felt something inside him crack. This was no longer a concert. This was a moment. Freddie stood slowly and sang the next verse directly toward her, his voice suddenly softer, more deliberate. Fans nearby noticed a shift but didn't understand it. The cameras followed him, projecting his face onto massive screens. But the reason for his focus remained invisible to most. The child's hands trembled as she held the sign tighter. Her mother stood behind her, eyes wide, already sensing something extraordinary was unfolding. Freddie reached the end of the song and let the final note linger longer than usual. The arena fell into a hush, thousands of people holding their breath. Freddie stepped forward. He raised a hand, signaling the band to pause. That alone shocked the audience. Freddie Mercury did not interrupt shows. "Hold on," he said into the microphone, his voice calm but firm. The crowd murmured. Security shifted nervously. Freddie looked directly at the child again. "Darling," he said gently, his voice suddenly stripped of performance, "is that sign for me?" The child froze. Her mother gasped softly. The child nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. Freddie crouched down again, lowering himself to her level, one knee touching the stage. The massive screens now showed something no one expected. Not spectacle, not glamour, but vulnerability. "What's your name?" Freddie asked softly. The child whispered it. The microphone barely caught the sound. Freddie smiled, not the bold grin of a rock star, but a warm, protective one. "I'm very glad you're here," he said. "Very glad." The arena was silent now. No screaming, no cheering, just thousands of people watching something sacred unfold. Freddie glanced back at the band briefly, then back at the child. "May I do something just for you?" he asked. The child nodded again, tears spilling freely now, sliding down her cheeks without resistance. Freddie stood slowly. He turned away from the crowd, something he had never done before, and walked toward the piano. The band looked confused. The crew froze. The set list was forgotten. Freddie sat down. The arena held its breath. He placed his hands on the keys, but didn't play yet. Instead, he looked back at the child one last time. "This one," he said softly into the microphone, "is yours." The child broke down completely. Her shoulders shook. Her mother covered her mouth, sobbing. Around them, strangers wiped their eyes, realizing they were witnessing something far greater than entertainment. Freddie pressed the first key, and in that instant, the concert stopped being a show. It became a gift. What Freddie Mercury would do next, what he would sing, what he would say, and how this moment would forever change that child's final memory, would leave the entire arena in tears. The first note fell like a whisper. Freddie Mercury's fingers pressed the piano keys with unusual restraint, as if he were afraid to disturb something fragile. The sound drifted through the arena, gentle and exposed, and the crowd instinctively fell silent. Thousands of people stood frozen, unsure whether they were allowed to breathe. Freddie didn't look at the audience. He looked at the child. She was crying openly now, small shoulders shaking beneath the oversized blanket. Her mother knelt beside her wheelchair, one hand gripping the armrest, the other pressed against her mouth as tears streamed freely. This was no longer disbelief. This was overwhelm. Freddie leaned closer to the microphone, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it in a stadium. "This isn't for charts," he said quietly. "This isn't for tonight's show." The crowd didn't cheer. They understood instinctively that applause would break something sacred. "This is for you," Freddie added, eyes still locked on the child. He began to sing. Not loudly, not dramatically. He sang as if the arena were a small room, and she was the only person in it. The lyrics carried hope without promises, warmth without denial. His voice, stripped of power, revealed something deeper, vulnerability wrapped in care. Every word felt intentional, chosen not to impress, but to comfort. The child's crying softened into quiet sobs. Her eyes never left him. She clutched the blanket tighter, as if anchoring herself to the moment, afraid it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Around her, strangers held each other. Somewhere in the crowd, a man who had come expecting loud guitars wiped his eyes in confusion. A group of teenagers who had screamed minutes earlier now stood perfectly still, hands over their mouths. This wasn't a concert anymore. It was a vigil. Freddie adjusted his pace to his breath, slowing when he felt emotion rise, grounding himself in the piano. He had sung to millions, but never like this, never with such deliberate gentleness. He wasn't trying to be strong. He was trying to be present. As the song reached its bridge, Freddie stood slowly, one hand still resting on the piano. He stepped away from it, walking back toward the edge of the stage. Security stiffened again. This was not protocol. But no one stopped him. Freddie knelt, not in exhaustion this time, but in tension, lowering himself until he was eye level with the child. The microphone lowered with him. "I don't know how much time you have," Freddie said softly, choosing honesty over comfort. "But I know this moment is yours." The child reached out instinctively. Her fingers trembled. Freddie reached back. For just a second, their hands touched, not dramatically, not for the cameras, but briefly, gently, like a reassurance passed between souls. The child cried harder, not from sadness, from being seen. Her mother collapsed fully now, sobbing against the barrier, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. Freddie glanced at her briefly, offering a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. "I see you," Freddie said softly. "Both of you." The band remained still behind him, instruments lowered. Brian watched with tears streaming freely down his face. Roger stared at the floor, unable to look directly at the scene without breaking. Freddie stood again and returned to the piano for the final verse. His voice wavered, not from weakness, but from emotion he no longer tried to control. The final notes faded slowly. Freddie let the silence remain. No applause followed. The crowd waited. Freddie turned once more to the child. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here." The child nodded, still crying, her face radiant with a kind of joy that hurt to witness. Only then did Freddie stand fully and face the arena. He didn't raise his fist. He didn't shout. He simply placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head. The arena erupted, not with screams, but with applause that felt like gratitude rather than celebration. Slow at first, then thunderous. Freddie accepted it briefly, then lifted a hand, signaling for quiet again. "Take care of each other," he said simply. That was all. The show resumed after that, louder, brighter, but something fundamental had changed. The crowd sang differently, listened differently, loved differently. Backstage later, Freddie sat alone, hands resting on his knees, breathing deeply. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind something heavier. Meaning, a crew member approached quietly. "She wants to see you," he said, "just for a moment." Freddie looked up. "Is she strong enough?" he asked. The crew member nodded. "She said it's important." Freddie stood. As he walked down the narrow hallway toward the small room prepared for them, his heart pounded, not with fear, but with awareness. He didn't know what he could possibly give her beyond what he already had, but he went anyway. Because some moments aren't about giving more. They're about showing up. When Freddie opened the door and saw her waiting, pale, exhausted, eyes still shining, he realized something that would stay with him forever. This hadn't been about making her final days brighter. It had been about reminding her and himself that love can exist fully, even when time is short. And what she would say to him next would leave Freddie Mercury forever changed. The room was small and quiet, far removed from the roar of the arena. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the space, softening the harsh reality of hospital-grade equipment that had been brought in just in case. Freddie Mercury paused briefly at the doorway, his hand still on the handle, as if he needed a moment to steady himself before stepping inside. This felt heavier than any stage. The child sat in her wheelchair near the center of the room, wrapped in the same oversized blanket. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were alive, brighter than before, as if something inside her had been awakened rather than drained. Her mother stood behind her, one hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder, the other clutching a tissue she no longer bothered to hide. Freddie stepped in slowly. "Hello, darling," he said softly. The child smiled, a small but radiant expression that seemed to erase the distance between them instantly. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, as if committing every detail to memory. "You're real," she finally whispered. Freddie smiled. "Last I checked." Her mother laughed through tears. Freddie crouched down, so they were eye level, careful not to overwhelm her with movement or presence. Without the lights, without the crowd, he looked different, not smaller, but gentler. "Are you tired?" Freddie asked. The child nodded. "A little, but I didn't want to sleep before seeing you." Something tightened in Freddie's chest. "I'm very glad you waited," he said. There was a long pause. The child fidgeted slightly, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "I practiced what I wanted to say," she admitted. "But when you sang, I forgot." Freddie leaned closer, listening with full attention. "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to be perfect." She took a breath, gathering courage that had nothing to do with age. "They told me I wouldn't make it to my birthday," she said quietly. "So my mom asked me what I wanted most." Freddie didn't interrupt. "I said I wanted to hear you sing," the child continued. "Not on the radio. For real. Her mother closed her eyes, overcome. Freddie felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly. Then I'm honored. The child looked down briefly, then back up at him. When you stopped the show, she said, I thought I was in trouble. Freddie chuckled softly. Oh no, quite the opposite. I thought maybe you were mad at me, she said, for the sign. Freddie's smile faded into something more serious. That sign, he said gently, was very brave. She tilted her head. Braver than you? The question startled him. Freddie laughed quietly, then shook his head. No, he admitted. I think you might have me beat. She smiled, pleased. There was another pause, deeper this time. The child's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful, almost solemn. Can I tell you something? She asked. Freddie nodded immediately. Anything. She hesitated, then spoke slowly, carefully. When you sang for me, she said, it didn't feel like goodbye anymore. Freddie's breath caught. What did it feel like? He asked. It felt like I wasn't alone, she replied. Like someone was sitting with me in the dark. The words hit Freddie harder than applause ever could. He reached out instinctively, placing his hand gently over hers. Careful, respectful, asking permission with his eyes before touching. She nodded. Her hand was warm. I get scared sometimes, she continued. Not of dying, just of being forgotten. Freddie shook his head firmly. You won't be. She searched his face. How do you know? Because, Freddie said softly, you changed something in me tonight. Her eyes widened slightly. I did. Yes, he replied. And I won't forget that. The child absorbed this quietly, as if weighing the truth of it. Then she smiled again, a fuller smile this time. Then it worked, she said. What worked? Freddie asked. She shrugged slightly. Coming. Freddie laughed softly, then looked at her mother. You raise a remarkable human. Her mother nodded, unable to speak. The child's energy began to fade visibly now. Her eyelids drooped, her grip on the blanket loosening. I think I need to rest, she said apologetically. Freddie nodded. That sounded like a very good idea. He stood slowly, reluctant but respectful. Before you do, he said gently, may I tell you something? She nodded. Freddie leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for her. Whenever you feel scared, he said, I want you to remember that moment when the whole room went quiet. That silence was full of love. Her eyes filled with tears again. I will, she whispered. As Freddie turned to leave, the child spoke once more. Freddie, she called softly. He turned back instantly. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. Freddie nodded, emotion flooding his chest. Thank you, he replied, for reminding me why music matters. He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him with care. In the hallway, Freddie leaned briefly against the wall, breathing deeply. Something inside him had shifted permanently. A piece of him now carried her courage, her honesty, her calm. This wasn't charity. This was exchange. As he walked back toward the noise and lights, Freddie Mercury understood something with startling clarity. That child had not come to see him perform. She had come to teach him something about presence, about love, about time. And what would happen next, what Freddie would choose to do with that lesson, would echo far beyond that night. Because some encounters don't end when the door closes. They begin. Freddie Mercury walked back onto the stage, carrying a weight he had never known before. The lights flared again. The music swelled. The crowd roared as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, the concert was resuming. To Freddie, something had already ended, and something else had quietly begun. He sang the next song flawlessly. That was the most surprising part. His voice didn't falter. His pitch didn't break. The performer in him still knew exactly what to do. But beneath the precision, there was a new stillness, not emptiness, but gravity. Every lyric felt heavier now. Every note carried meaning he hadn't planned. Freddie moved across the stage slower than usual, more deliberate. He looked out the crowd not as a force to conquer, but as individuals, thousands of separate lives intersecting with his for just a few hours. And among them, One small presence now echoed louder than all the rest. Backstage, Brian watched closely. He noticed a difference immediately, not weakness, not distraction, but focus sharpened by emotion. "He's changed," Roger muttered quietly. Brian nodded. "Yes." Freddie finished the show without incident. The final applause was deafening, celebratory, triumphant. He bowed deeply, pressed his hand to his heart, and smiled, but it was no longer the smile of conquest. It was gratitude. When the curtain closed, Freddie stood alone for a moment in the darkness. The sound of the crowd faded slowly, like waves retreating from shore. He didn't rush to celebrate. He didn't laugh. He didn't reach for champagne. Instead, he sat down. The dressing room was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full, saturated with memory. Freddie replayed the child's words over and over. It didn't feel like goodbye anymore. It felt like I wasn't alone. He had sung to fill stadiums. Tonight, he had sung to fill one small space where fear lived. And that had changed everything. Later, as the crew packed equipment and laughter returned down the hallways, Freddie remained still, hands folded loosely in his lap. Someone knocked gently and entered. The tour manager, careful with his tone. "She's resting now," he said softly. "Her mother wanted you to know she fell asleep smiling." Freddie closed his eyes. Smiling. The word landed like a benediction. "Thank you," Freddie said quietly. When he finally stood, his body felt different. Tired, yes, but grounded. As if something restless inside him had finally settled. That night, back at the hotel, Freddie didn't turn on music. He didn't watch television. He sat by the window and stared out at the city lights, letting the quiet speak. He thought of how the child had looked at him, not with awe, not with expectation, but with trust. That terrified him, not because he feared disappointing her, but because he realized how much responsibility came with being truly seen. Freddie had spent years mastering illusion, larger-than-life confidence, fearless sound, unapologetic presence. But that child had not needed illusion. She had needed honesty, and Freddie had given it. As dawn crept into the room, Freddie made a decision he did not speak aloud. Not yet, but it settled in him with certainty. He would no longer treat moments like that as accidents. He would make room for them. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes appeared. Freddie requested fewer barriers between the stage and the audience. He asked security to watch not only for danger, but for signs of people who needed something beyond a song. No announcements were made. No headlines followed. But something shifted. Freddie began visiting hospitals quietly while on tour, never announcing it, never allowing cameras. He sat beside beds, listened more than he spoke, sang softly when asked, not as a star. As a human, those moments drained him more than concerts ever had, but they also sustained him in ways he couldn't explain. One evening, after another show, Freddie stood alone again and thought of the child, of her bravery, her calm, her ability to face the unimaginable with honesty. He realized something unsettling and beautiful. She had not come to him for escape. She had come to him for companionship. That realization stripped music of its vanity and gave it purpose. Months later, long after that night faded into rumor, Freddie would still think of her whenever the crowd grew loud, whenever applause threatened to drown out meaning. He would remember the quiet, the way an entire arena had held its breath, the way one small life had intersected with his and left a permanent mark. And he would understand something with clarity that hurt and healed at the same time, that the greatest performances aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones that leave silence behind. Because what Freddie Mercury felt that night was not pity. It was connection. And the final thing he would do, the one act that would turn this moment into something eternal, was still ahead. Something no one expected. Something the child would never hear about, but would somehow feel. The letter arrived quietly. No return address. No announcement. Just a simple envelope waiting among contracts, schedules, and unopened invitations. Freddie Mercury almost missed it, almost set aside with the rest of the noise that followed him everywhere. But something about it made him stop. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short note, written carefully, the letters uneven but deliberate. It was from the child's mother. She wrote about the night of the concert, about how her daughter had slept peacefully afterward, humming fragments of the song Freddie had played just for her, about how, for the first time in weeks, she hadn't asked how much time she had left. She had asked how music could feel like someone holding your hand. Freddie sat down. The letter ended with a single line. She left this world knowing she was seen. Freddie closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for comfort. The words settled into him slowly, reshaping something deep inside his chest. He had sung for millions, but one person had truly heard him. That evening, Freddie went to the piano alone. No audience, no purpose beyond memory. He played softly, not the song from that night, but something new, something unfinished, a melody that didn't demand attention. He played until the emotion rose, then stopped. He didn't want to turn her memory into performance. Some things deserved to remain untouched. In the months that followed, Freddie changed in ways only those closest to him noticed. He laughed the same. He commanded stages the same. But there was restraint now, a gentler awareness of when to push and when to pause. He listened more. He watched faces in the crowd more closely. And sometimes mid-song, he would soften his voice just slightly, as if remembering a small girl who had taught him that power didn't always need volume. He never spoke publicly about her. There were no interviews, no charity announcements tied to her name, no stories fed to press. The world never knew. That was intentional, because that moment had not belonged to the world. It had belonged to two people who met briefly at the edge of time. One night, years later, after another Thunder performance, Freddie stood alone backstage again. The applause faded. The stage lights dimmed. And once more, silence filled the space where music had lived. This time, it didn't frighten him. He touched the edge of the piano, resting his hand there for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he whispered. Not to the crowd, not to fame, but to a memory that had shaped him. Somewhere far away, a child had cried, not from fear, but from being seen. And that, Freddie understood, was the purest form of connection he would ever know. Music could move crowds, but compassion could change lives. As Freddie Mercury walked away from the stage that night, he carried no regret about the song he had interrupted, the setlist he had broken, or the rules he had ignored, because one small moment of humanity had outlived every note. And long after the lights faded, long after voices fell silent, that gift, freely given, remained, not as legend, but as love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Freddie Mercury. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Freddie Mercury.